First off, I wanted to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. If you find it difficult to gain and finish hours-long 8 to 10 podcasts per week, please subscribe to Most Advanced Featured and Accurate Quick Podcast Summaries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can start with free trial, which lets you listen all the podcasts, and later, just for the price of candy in most places. It will save you from spending 15 to 20 hours per week catching up. Here is a rundown on the secret habits of supercommunicators, featuring Charles Duhigg by chriswilliamson.org. Charles Duhigg believes that most people get communication wrong by thinking it's something that should happen naturally, without much thought or effort. However, he argues that communication is a set of skills that can be learned and practiced to become a supercommunicator. Duhigg notes that communication is tightly tied to our sense of self and expression of who we are, and that being a good or bad communicator can affect how others perceive our moral worth. Duhigg explains that communication is a superpower that has allowed humans to build complex societies and pass knowledge from one generation to the next. He notes that our brains have evolved to be good at communication, but it still requires practice and effort to become a supercommunicator. When it comes to introverts and extroverts, Duhigg suggests that the difference is not necessarily innate, but rather a set of habits that we become comfortable with. Extroverts often have more opportunities to practice communication and may be more comfortable with emotional conversations, while introverts may need to make more of an effort to practice and develop their communication skills. Duhigg identifies 3 types of conversations that occur in any discussion: practical, emotional, and social. He notes that if 2 people are having different types of conversations at the same time, they may not be able to hear or understand each other. However, if they can match or invite the other person to match their type of conversation, they can form a connection and have a more effective conversation. He also notes that supercommunicators are good listeners, but that listening is not just about remaining silent. Rather, it's about proving that you're listening by using techniques such as looping for understanding, which involves asking questions, listening to the response, and then repeating back what you heard in your own words. Duhigg emphasizes that communication is a skill that can be learned and practiced, and that anyone can become a supercommunicator with effort and dedication. He notes that supercommunicators are not just naturally good at communication, but have developed their skills through practice and experience. One of the key skills of supercommunicators is asking deep questions that invite others to share their thoughts and feelings. Duhigg notes that this can be as simple as asking someone what made them decide to pursue a particular career or how they felt about a particular experience. He also notes that asking deep questions can help to create a sense of being seen and understood, and can help to build connections with others. Duhigg also emphasizes the importance of listening in communication, and notes that simply remaining silent is not enough. Rather, listeners need to prove that they're paying attention by using techniques such as looping for understanding. This involves asking questions, listening to the response, and then repeating back what you heard in your own words. However, by learning and practicing the skills of supercommunicators, anyone can become more effective at communicating and building connections with others. This is often done through a technique called looping for understanding, where you repeat back what you've heard to ensure you understand the other person's perspective. However, it's not just about parroting back what they said, but also about asking deep questions to show you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Chris Williamson noted that bad conversations can feel like a game of tennis, where everyone is just waiting for their turn to speak.
Charles Duhigg agreed, saying that great conversations are often messy and non-linear, with people sharing their thoughts and feelings in a way that's authentic and vulnerable. Duhigg emphasized the importance of vulnerability in building trust and connection with others. He explained that vulnerability isn't just about sharing your feelings or weaknesses, but about being willing to take risks and be open with others. When we're vulnerable with someone, it creates a sense of reciprocity, where they're more likely to be vulnerable with us in return. However, Duhigg also noted that not all vulnerability is created equal. He distinguished between authentic vulnerability and performative vulnerability, where people share their feelings or weaknesses in a way that's calculated to elicit a certain response from others. Authentic vulnerability, on the other hand, is about being genuine and open without expecting anything in return. The conversation also touched on the topic of parasocial relationships, where people form connections with others through social media or other online platforms. Duhigg noted that while these relationships can be real, they can also be superficial or manipulative. He emphasized the importance of being authentic and genuine in our online interactions, rather than trying to present a curated version of ourselves.
Chris Williamson brought up the topic of venting, which is a way of sharing gossip or negative feelings about someone else under the guise of concern. The final skill discussed was the importance of paying attention to the kind of conversation that's happening.
Duhigg noted that there are 3 types of conversations: practical, emotional, and social. By being attuned to the mindset of the other person, we can adjust our communication style to match their needs and build a deeper connection with them. This is because when we're in a good conversation, our bodies start to match each other, including our breathing, heart rates, and even the dilation of our pupils. Our thoughts also become more similar, and we start to use the same parts of our brain. This phenomenon is known as neural entrainment, and it releases a reward sensation that makes us feel good. Duhigg explains that there are 3 types of conversations: emotional, practical, and social. Each type uses different parts of our brain, and when we're in an emotional mindset, we're using the basal ganglia, while practical conversations use the prefrontal cortex. This is why matching each other is so powerful, as it activates the same part of our brain that we know is active in the other person. The Dartmouth study found that when people watch confusing movie clips together, their brains become aligned, and they're able to come to a consensus more easily. This is because there's at least one person in the group who is a supercommunicator, someone who asks a lot of questions and invites others into the conversation. This person sets a tone that everyone else wants to follow, and it makes the conversation feel more connected and enjoyable. Duhigg also talks about the concept of reverse charisma, which is not trying to be interesting to others, but making them feel interesting around you. This is way easier to do than trying to be charismatic, and it's a more effective way to build connections with others. He quotes Maya Angelou, saying that people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. Duhigg agrees, saying that when we're in a conversation, we're not paying attention to the words, but rather how we feel. The conversation also touches on the topic of small talk, which can be awkward and anxiety-provoking for many people. However, Duhigg suggests that the problem with small talk is not the talk itself, but rather the anxiety we feel when we go into it. Instead, one can begin with a simple query and transition into a more meaningful discussion. He shares an example of how to turn a conversation about the weather into a deeper discussion by asking follow-up questions that show genuine curiosity. To initiate deep conversations, Duhigg suggests asking questions that one is genuinely interested in, rather than just making small talk. He shares a story about a NASA astronaut who would ask candidates about their hopes and dreams within 3 questions, and how this approach helped him to have meaningful conversations with strangers. Duhigg also discusses the importance of emotional intelligence in deep conversations. He shares a story about how NASA developed a way to assess emotional intelligence in astronauts by observing how they react to a simulated embarrassing situation. The candidates who showed empathy and vulnerability in their response were more likely to have high emotional intelligence. Laughter is another aspect of deep conversations that Duhigg explores. He shares research by Robert Provine, who found that laughter is not just a response to humor, but also a way to show vulnerability and connect with others. Duhigg notes that laughter is a pro-social behavior that helps to forge connections with others. When it comes to couples, Duhigg discusses the importance of effective communication. He notes that a pattern called kitchen sinking, where a fight about one thing becomes a fight about everything, is disastrous for relationships. Instead, couples should try to control the environment together, such as by setting boundaries or deciding when to discuss a particular topic. This approach helps to create a sense of teamwork and reduces the likelihood of lasting consequences from conflicts. Duhigg believes that this sense of teamwork comes from controlling the environment together and working towards a common goal. By doing so, couples can create a sense of partnership and reduce the likelihood of conflicts escalating into full-blown fights. When we try to control others online, it's natural, but it can become toxic because we're not seeing each other face to face. However, if we take a step back and try to have a genuine conversation, online conversations can be just as good as any other conversation. Studies have shown that even small things like saying please and thank you can improve the tone of an online conversation. The conversation then shifted to how online discourse has affected our expectations of communication. The guest, Charles Duhigg, pointed out that online conversations often highlight one aspect of identity very prominently, which can lead to people making assumptions about others based on a single label. In real life, people have multiple identities, and online conversations can make it harder to see beyond that one label.
The host, Chris Williamson, shared an example of how online discourse can create a skewed perspective of the world. He mentioned how people may overestimate the number of people shot by police or the number of women who are oppressed, because online conversations often focus on edge cases rather than the majority. This can lead to a sense of dissidence when people encounter evidence in the real world that doesn't agree with what they've learned online.
Charles Duhigg then shared a story about how people learned to use telephones effectively over time. When phones first became popular, people didn't know how to use them, and conversations were stilted. However, as people learned to use phones, they developed new skills for communication, such as over-enunciating words and putting more emotion into their voice. Similarly, people are now learning to have effective online conversations, and Gen Z is leading the way. Charles Duhigg pointed out that this is a common concern, but that communication skills are just that skills that can be learned and improved.
He also asked Chris about how his communication style has changed since moving to the US, and Chris shared some examples of how he has had to adapt to a new cultural context. He believes that by giving our brains the skills they need and practicing, we can become super communicators. This is evident in how people adapt to new environments and cultures, such as adopting local phrases and pronunciations. For instance, if someone moves to a place where Cadbury is pronounced differently, they will eventually start pronouncing it the same way. Similarly, they will start using local words like lift and boot instead of elevator and trunk. This adaptability is a testament to the brain's ability to learn and adjust it.
To stay updated on Charles Duhigg's work, people can sign up for his newsletter, The Science of Better, on his website, charlesduhigg.com. He also encourages readers to email him as he reads and responds to every email personally. His book, Supercommunicators, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and local bookstores. Charles Duhigg appreciates the opportunity to connect with his audience and invites them to reach out to him.
The conversation comes to a close with Chris Williamson thanking Charles Duhigg for his time and insights. Thank you for tuning in. Please click follow button. And just remember, subscription is only £1 or $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.